I am Maria Pilar Aquino. I work at the University of San Diego in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies. And my main areas of teaching include anything within the range of society and religion or Christian social ethics. And I teach courses like feminist theology, liberation theology, Christian social ethics, of course, Christian social justice. And also, I have been developing for the past 6, 7 years courses in the area of religion and conflict transformation, religion and peace building. So we just had that course added recently to the permanent curriculum. And that is the main area that I teach, and it attracts a great deal of students. They are interested in learning more about feminist theology, about religion and peace building, and liberation theologies in general.
All right, so we're going to go back in time a little bit. We want to start kind of with your earliest experiences of your own gender. So when did you kind of feel that you were different from other people around you, or so that those kind of early moments of finding out that you were a woman, or those type of experiences.
Mm-hmm. On my early experiences of me as a woman, I can say that it was connected to the movements for transformation in Latin America. So my theological education took place in Latin America. I studied in Mexico City, my BA and license in theology, and I also took several courses, summer or semester long, in Costa Rica, the Department of Ecumenical Investigation, DEI, and Lima, too, with Gustavo Gutierrez. So several times I went to Lima for the summer courses. In Mexico, I was living and working with the sisters, the religious community, because I was a nun for nearly 10 years. I regret not a single minute of it. It was exciting. I believe that I was so very lucky that I got to religious life. I was very young. I was about 17 and a half years old, and it was in the early 1970s. 1974, I joined the a community of sisters. This is a French community in Mexico City. And with them, of course, working with the people, it was at the time in which it was so strong emphasis on the church. The church devised the Latin American Conference of Bishops in Medellin, 1968. And then 1979, the Conference of Bishops in Latin America that took place in the city of Puebla, Mexico. So it was the whole period of thinking about what does it mean to be a Christian in a continent so much marked by impoverishment, by social injustice, and especially by war, repression, massacres, the assassination of so many people, and I was working with them. I even, in 1980, I served for a year long, and then in and out in Nicaragua, right after the Sandinista revolution. That was 1979. So it was in those years, there was a lot of excitement and the desire of connecting religion to the social. It was kind of not the desire of connection, it was connected. The Christians saw in that type of context of revolution, of transformation, of envisioning a new society, we saw our world as a matter of being there with the people. So I was there with the people in Guatemala, El Salvador, Chile, all the situation that happened after the Pinochet coup. Argentina. It was the time of the dictatorships in Latin America, and Christians very much taking a responsibility for what was happening. And I was there at that moment. In that sense, I believe that I was very lucky in those formative years. So I knew that the movement there was largely led by elites, whether clerical or the intellectuals or the political leaders. The elites were largely composed by men, so there were very few women. engage in the leadership positions in terms of making decisions about movements, and a large number of movements were doing the movement. And then, of course, the awareness came about how is it that we women in church and in theology were so few. We are few today. And that tells you what is the situation of women in theology in the context of the Latin American church. So, but in those years, the invisibility of women, in silence of women, as Elizabeth Schussler, rightly notes, the invisibility and silencing of women were very noticeable. So for me, that was very clear. And I joined with other people, other communities also involved in the movement, in trying to bring that invisibility to make it visible. Women, Theology, and Church, 1979. So that was the beginning of
That was kind of the start of that.
Yes.
Addressing gender specifically, or women.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and you had mentioned 1979 as that.
You're doing really well. And
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to fix your necklace slightly, just so it's
Oh, I like it.
Yeah.
Please do that.
I mean,
Yes.
it's just such a beautiful
Is
shot.
it straight?
Yes.
Thank you.
It's like
I don't
it's
know.
gonna be such
I
a
love
good
it.
shot.
This is
with
my
all-
favorite one so far.
Oh,
colors.
thank you.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
you have the colors and, anyways, okay.
Okay.
And you're sounding great, so thank you.
I'm trying to make my English as clear as possible
Oh,
You're doing great.
because of my accent. So,
Fine by me. Great.
It's you. It's right. It's,
Thank
and
you.
You're easily understood. All right. So to kind of think back to those formative years that you're talking about, and you had mentioned that you were 17 at one point, so that seemed like a formative year. What were your kind of early experiences during that time of the divine, of theology, of God, however you kind of your spirituality during that time?
yes, in those formative years, the process itself of engaging in such a lively, dynamic, engaging movements for change, it was deeply informed by an understanding of God as God being on the side of the poor. And that is one of the main principles and beliefs of liberation theology. So I grew up at the core of liberation theology with the founding generation of liberation theology. So in that sense, I was also very blessed and very lucky to be a part of that, of being exposed to liberation theology at such an early age, in its formative years as well. So it was something that we did not question. It was something that we embraced it with passion, with commitment. God being working with the poor, struggling for change and liberation. So the God of the poor, as beautifully Gustavo Gutierrez presents in his book, The God of the Poor, and the historical power of the poor. So all of this, drinking from our own wells, namely drinking, enriching our faith through commitment. So that was a very important aspect of my spirituality. I lived for many years in very poor neighborhoods as a part of the community, but also when I left the community. So continued to live in very marginalized areas. And when you are there, it is the faith of the people that keep your faith very much alive, informing my own faith. So I never lost sight of the mutual connection that exists between the personal experience and the experience of being with the people, with the movement. It is kind of enriching that kind of dynamic and enlightening faith. I found a light in my life. I find a direction in my life. There was something that I will look for, something that will give me energy, the motivation to continue in my commitment. So it was the God of the poor. And then the God of the poor and the oppressed also made me realize that there was another step needed to be taken, because that God was in many ways marginalizing so many women. So it was not God in God's self, but rather the institutions, the theological traditions, the interpretations of religion that were taking away the power of God from us. So this process, I did it in many ways as a part of the larger community of women, theologians, and also activists. I worked with Mennonites at that time, working in the context of Mexico and other countries as well. So Mennonites, the Quakers, very influential in my life, and the religious nuns. Who cares about religious nuns? Who speaks about the nuns? And I believe that we owe a great deal of our life today to the work done by the nuns. The nuns were always working on the most remote locations in our countries, and they are highly respected. So they had a deep influence on me. They taught me to trust in the presence of God in many personifications, the divine providence, always caring for us, always leading our lives, or my life, in that sense. So it was in that context in which we thought that there was the need of making something more meaningful for women. So the first gathering of theologians that I attended was in 1979. That was our first meeting of women theologians, women involved in the processes of change in those years. We have the earliest publication that we have in the Latin American context is on women and women theology and church in the context of the revolutionary processes of Latin America. So after the 1979 gathering that took place in Mexico City, in my convent, I should say, with the helper sisters, after that, other meetings took place in Brazil, different places, Brazil, Colombia, Guatemala, Chile. So we continued with the reflection, and there was another meeting which has become very important for many of us, and that was, if I am not mistaken, 1996, where we had an international meeting in Costa Rica. So, quote unquote, first world women met with quote unquote the third world women. It was international gathering. It was also the presence of European feminist theologians. And at that meeting, we produced that book, Spirituality for Life. It's a wonderful, just by reading the final statement in that book, we get the sense of what was our vision, our commitment, facing those views or multiple faces of capitalism and its impact on the lives of women. Women theologians wanted to provide a theological response to that, and the response was that of commitment, of taking responsibility for our own theological production in that context, producing a word that is relevant to people's lives.
Thank you. That was great. I know that I'm like, whenever the
I
chopper
know, the
goes
helicopter
by, I'm
goes by, it's like-
it's getting such good stories. So.
Well, I'm
it's-
wondering, actually, would it be possible to just say that again when you started at the end of the book?
Just no, the end
Just
of the
the
book.
end of the
So
book.
you had said the last line of the book of that 1996 meeting. You said it's very important, and then the helicopter came over. So
Oh, okay.
I don't know what it is with the helicopters, but wherever you feel, I mean, I think
Okay.
I can use
yeah,
it. but-
why is that end of that book in 19 that you guys produced in 1996? Why is that so important for the women's movement, especially in Latin America?
Oh, I can contextualize that in
Yeah.
a larger frame.
Yeah.
I can do that. So I think that we can do that. I'm hoping that I don't forget. So when
Yeah.
you're articulating ideas,
Yeah.
so how do I go back to that? Very good. So your question was in those formative years. Very good. Okay, I can do
Go.
that. I will.
Yeah. And
Okay.
we'll pray no helicopter comes by.
Okay. So in those formative years of feminist awareness, if you wish, I must recognize and honor the contribution of third world feminist theologians, people like Virginia Favela from the Philippines, and also Sister Mary John Mananzan. I must recognize the work of theologians who made possible for us third world women to have presence and a voice in the theological landscape in the early 1980s, we became involved in the establishment of the Ecumenical Association of Third World Theologians, IDWT. Within IDWT, in those years, we perceived the dominant voice of males. So Virginia Favela and Mary John Mananzan, together with other theologians, formed, against the grain, the Women's Commission of IDWT. The Women's Commission was highly involved in bringing third world women together in international conventions. We had several of those. We had one in Huaxtepec, Mexico, another one very influential in 1996, if I remember correctly, in which we invited a group of international feminist theologians. I should say that both. There was one in Costa Rica, 1996, and there was another one in Mexico City, the Huaxtepec conference. So out of those conferences, there was another one, 1992. So I can mention several that just come to my mind in that. But the point is that there was the effort of bringing the voices of women, not just of Latin American and the Caribbean early feminist theologians, but also we had the concern of engaging in conversation with, quote unquote, first world theologians. The 1996 conference was particularly important in Costa Rica because we produced that book, Spirituality for Life. And we examined the marginalization and the oppression of women on several levels, economics and politics, culture, church, theology, and so forth. And we produced a very powerful final document. Just by reading the final document, we can see how we, facing the dehumanizing and exclusionary effects of capitalism, what kind of response we wanted to provide. And our response was that of strengthening a spirituality for life and a commitment to justice, and also the strengthening of solidarity among women beyond our local locations, and keeping us together was that option for the poor, as we identified as the option for the marginalized and oppressed women, and keeping together with the commitment to justice and our vision of liberation. So those conferences have been so influential in creating, if you will, a mindset of global solidarity.
Thank you.
That's what
this
it was
video is
awesome.
about,
Yeah, that's what we're hoping to capture. So we got it.
And I want that to remain on the archives,
This will, yeah.
because very few people know what does it mean to live under such extreme poverty. And today, that is what so many people, I mean, it's just 15 minutes away from here in all the neighborhoods. And so many people have no water today, and no drainage, and no sewer system, and nothing.
Yeah, we are so close. I always forget. It's just like right over that.
We can see Tijuana from here,
Yeah.
going to the top of the hotel. We can see that. Yeah. Oh, I left by saying what took me to the academy, and I'm going to pick up right there. Okay.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Very good.
good.
Ready? Okay. You tell
And action.
me. Okay.
Go right ahead.
So what took me to the academy? Also, I do not know how or why, but I always had in my heart this desire for continued learning. Since I was very young at secondary school, I loved to read poetry of the mystics. In the Spanish tradition and the Latin American tradition has a great deal of poetry and mystics. One of them, of course, in the Spanish tradition, we have San Juan de la Cruz, we have Teresa of Avila, we have a large list of mystics. In the Mexican tradition, a huge figure for me always was Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, that 17th century writer. For me, it was amazing that being so young, the 17th century, she put together the largest library of the Americas. at that time. She was a scientist, she was a writer, she was a great thinker, so much so that European scholars, philosophers, and theologians will make the trip to Mexico only to have a conversation with Sor Juana. She was so wise woman. Sor Juana is a part of Mexican culture, it is true, but it is also a great icon for Mexican women. So for Sor Juana, I always like to read her writings and the mystics and so. And also, being so young, by that time, I should say, I was 8 years old when my family moved from Ixtlan del Rio, Nayarit, to San Luis Rio Colorado, Sonora, on the Sonoran, by the border of Arizona. That is why my younger years I spent at the border in San Luis, Sonora. I grew up there. San Luis, Sonora, very close to Somerton, Arizona, Yuma, Arizona. San Luis, Arizona, by the border, that is the area where Cesar Chavez began the campesino movement, the farm workers movement. Says my father was a part of the Cesar Chavez movement. He was a migrant worker, my father. I also myself worked, I was 15, 16, 14 years old. Our summers were those with my sisters working on the fields. We worked on the harvesting of tomato, lettuce, onion, and so forth. So that was my life. In that context, with the inspiration of the spiritual writers, I became a catechist at a very early age. I was 11, 12 years old when I became a catechist in San Luis, Sonora. San Luis, Sonora, there was a group of religious women, nuns. And for me, they were so educated. They had no hospitals, no schools. They were missionaries, working always with the poor. That was the charism of this community. The Helper Sisters, this French community. And they were coming from the best traditions of religious education at the Catholic Institute in Paris. So for me, they became my idols, my icons. Oh, how much I wish to be an educated woman and then teaching religion. And so my desire of learning was enriched by my contact with the sisters. So every Saturday for me, it was a matter of being at the church, learning about lessons. I also learned about guitar. I forgot about that, right now. But it's just so it was forming a community of young women concerned about religious education and learning about the best methods for conveying, quote unquote, the truths of Christianity to the people. So that environment made me grow in self-esteem, in desire for doing something that also gave me direction in life. So by my age of 17, I joined the community. I went to Mexico City, and that is how I continued to develop. But from being a catechist at early age, soon as I became part of the community, my idea was I needed to study theology. And the sisters were very supportive at that point. In my BA in licensing theology, I completed my studies while being a part of the sisters. The issue with the community came when I wanted to continue with my doctoral studies. They said that I was too young. I was 26, 27 years old. Too young. I should wait for 10 more years so that I can go to my doctoral studies. So to me, at that age, it was like the time for waiting was long. So that is why I left the community. It was not because lack of vocation, which I do love and I admire the sisters so very much. I have a great deal of respect for the nuns in general, but in particular for those nuns whose charism is that mission, is that being out there with the people, is that dedicating their lives to the promotion of justice among the poor. So that was my transition to academy, together with the other events that were happening in my life. The gathering of theologians after the 1979 meeting, the meeting with international theologians, and then something very interesting happened. It was 1978 when I started to think about my a STL dissertation on my thesis. In those years, I was focusing on biblical studies in the context of liberation theology. I came across in those years, my emphasis was on social justice in Scripture. 1980 came while working on my dissertation. 1980 came, and it was the assassination of Bishop Oscar Romero. It was a dramatic event for many of us in Latin America, and Bishop Romero made me rethink the focus of my dissertation. So I focused on the topic of martyrdom, martyria, in the book of Revelation and in the apocalyptic tradition, in the Hebrew scriptures, apocalyptic tradition, and then moving to the Christian scriptures and the book of Revelation. So I came across this essay by someone who was providing a sample of the application of the historical critical methods to scripture. And the essay was by, by a young German biblical scholar, Elisabeth Schussler. She was not Fiorenza at the time. Elisabeth Schussler, oh my God, a woman writing. At that time, she was at the University of Münster. So I looked for her work like crazy so that I can use it in my dissertation. I found her works on the book of Revelation, and that was my first exposure to the works of Elizabeth and on feminist work. So you put together the influence of the Women's Commission of Edward, my connection with a highly committed religious community, very much in tune with the Church of Medellin and the Church of Puebla and the liberation theology, and you put together this desire to continue learning from these spiritual writers and so forth. So my step to the academy was a kind of natural in that sense. And finding a voice there became a major issue because the great number of works were done by male liberation theologians and the male stream academy in general. So for me, it was important that, that we begin to develop a voice as women, and soon, reflecting on our experiences, a word about feminist thinking, feminist theology. So that was my, transitional ways of what influenced me in my feminist writing.
Wait.
My work is very scattered in terms of a major essays. So people, when they look at my vita, they may think, oh, she has only this and this and these books, not as much as many other writers. I have so many essays, major,
That's how I know your work is
major
Yeah.
chapters. I need the time to sit down, bring them all together, and produce the books before I die.
Do it. You gotta take the time. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll ask that question about
Yeah.
Major
dramatic
works.
graph. We've got to ask that at
Oh,
time.
and the other issue, the edited work, I do value edited work. Perhaps scholarly will not have that much worth. For third world women, it does. We are bringing the voices together, or voices which are not easily heard in the context of the U.S. So editorial work from the third world standpoint is fundamental. Who knows about the work of Geraldina Céspedes? Who knows about the work of Maria Cristina Tirsa Ventura? Who knows about the work of Consuelo Vélez? If we don't bring their voices in editorial work, nobody will know that they exist. That I think is important to say. You know what? To change the parameters of the academy, because here the value is on single-authored individualistic work. I think that's important to mention that.
All right. I wanted to ask with the communities that were really pushing you through these things, through your academic career, and the support you got from the sisters, which is great, through your BA. I'm wondering, were there any times that were just really difficult? You felt like you didn't necessarily want to keep going with theology, or it was just a very hard path to walk? And then, what did keep you going? Because clearly you kept going.
Yeah, in terms of difficult times. So yes, I am in the academy. I have learned a great deal from the academy and contributed to the academy, I believe. So during that time, it is a long journey, and so many things that one needs to overcome: self-confidence, finding a voice, finding a place with whom to work. So feminist theologians are not welcomed easily. So it does take effort, it does take perseverance, it does take a clear commitment on keeping the vision alive, as Elizabeth says so often. Keeping the vision alive of change and hope. It was very difficult for me to make the transition to the US. And that has to do with the lack of opportunities that I found in my own country, Mexico. I ended my doctoral degree in 1990, and I applied to as many universities as possible in Mexico, including the Jesuit university system, the Iberoamericanas, at several universities. There was no place in those years for Mexican women to do theology in the Mexican university context. So for me, I was lucky in many ways as well to find a place in the U.S. So again, the sisters rescued me. It was the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet who offered me a position at Mount St. Mary's College, Los Angeles, and I am deeply grateful to them as well. So the nuns having kind of persisted in my life in terms of providing support, and so I should mention priests as well. There was a wonderful, wonderful priest to whom I owe, in many ways, my theological vocation. He was my spiritual director, my professor of theology. Jorge Dominguez is his name, a Franciscan, highly respected in Mexico. So I owe him so much of my theological life, together with my feminist models and in the inspiring people. But in the journey of getting to where I am, it was not easy. So in Mexico, it was very difficult for me to find a place. So I struggled in the U.S. In the sense of I wanted to be connected as much as possible with my Mexican culture, Mexican people. That is why USD was so perfect for me. So USD was closer to the border. It's the only Catholic university closer to the border. So for me, it was perfect. Here, in terms of publication, same thing. Publishers give preference to individual authors. So publishers in the U.S., I have learned, they told me themselves, many of them, I'm not going to mention them so that I do not speak bad about them, but some of them say that they prefer not edited works. They have more individualistic tendency. They prefer single voice authors, especially books that can be used in the classroom. They are not very much on the side of highly sophisticated theoretical works. They prefer more books that are used in the classroom. And one publisher also told me that these days liberation theology does not sell very well. So they were not translating any longer, except for those big names, translating the works of liberation theologians from the Third World to English in the US. So looking at the politics of publication, the politics of bringing discourse to the public arena, I have maintained a commitment to editorial work. I believe that editing books is important for the simple reason that I give preference to collective works, working together with others. This is a way of keeping the discussion among ourselves alive in connection to our local communities. And it is like saying that individualistic work creating stars in theology is good, but we also have a huge sky. We also have a multiplicity of voices that we need to hear. So that is why I keep my commitment to editorial work. I still have all kinds of plenty of major book chapters and in journal essays published. Someday I will have the time to sit down, bring them all together in single voice books. Someday. Okay.
All right.
So in the classroom, I always tell my students two things. When you think about issues of women, go beyond our provincialistic and pragmatical way of thinking in the U.S., typical of U.S. culture, so pragmatically oriented and so provincialistically oriented. So now think globally. Think about us from here. Think globally. Think about all the women's movements that are taking place around the world, and also think about how are you connecting your life with the experiences of those who are outside, not outside, out there around the world. Decisions we make here affect others around the world, and the experiences of those around the world affect us. The idea of interconnectedness is a beautiful principle in feminist theology. So I always encourage my students to keep that in mind. They are doing research. We are here in the classroom. I conceptualize the classroom as a space of struggle. It's our site of struggle. Not always I can be out there on the streets with the banner of social justice, but the classroom is my space. So we do not need to make the kind of false divisions between theory and practice. If you are doing theology which is sensitive to the global movements for social justice, and you are very much wearing somebody else's shoes in terms of claims and desires for social justice, we are interconnected. We do not need to make that kind of false distinctions, theory and no. And I find very much sad in the classroom when I hear students, especially graduate students, who say that reading the books of feminist theologians, they are so theoretical. I mean, not all. When I think about feminist theologians of liberation, they are sensitive. They bring the aspirations of people in the work for social justice to the academy. The academy is our site of struggle. It is not my role to be out there with a weapon in hand, struggling for justice. I am on the streets in solidarity with the marches of NGOs and the women's movements when the time comes. But my day-to-day work is in the classroom. In the classroom, it is where this is the way in which I do. So I am creating a discourse which is not the one of mainstream discourse, but what tools do I have in theology? It is rhetoric, liberating emancipatory rhetoric. It is the power of words. It is the shaping ideologies, mindsets, changing culture, changing perceptions, worldviews. That is what we do. We do teaching. That's what we do. That is our site of struggle. So for many students, I feel that they are out of place when they are asking for the academy what the academy cannot do. In terms of feminist theology, that is what we do. We are professors, teachers of theology. And the important thing is to keep one foot in the academy and the other rooted on the social movements for change. That is the key. Those who often say that the division exists between theory and practice are those who have no idea whatsoever, no rooting on the movements for change out there.
Yep.
Thinking about, ready? You tell me.
Go.
Okay. Thinking about the future, feminist work faces a great deal of challenges. We are not studying out from zero. There's a lot of work that is being done out there. The main concern is how feminist theologians of liberation connect to the multiplicity of women's organizations and feminist work that is being done around the world. I have in mind women peacemakers working, for example, in remote locations like Mindanao in the Philippines. Who cares about Mindanao, you see? Uganda, those who are working with child soldiers, trying to reinsert them into community and society. I'm thinking about those women who are working in the war zones of Colombia, trying to build community. I'm thinking about those who in Peru are trying to empower a civil society in the work for human rights. I am thinking of my friends in Bosnia who are working for the healing of society after war, massive rape of women. In the Dominican Republic, all my feminist friends working for the giving responses to people affected by AIDS and prostitution, which is so huge. Dominican Republic is exploitation of children as well. I have in mind my friends in Northern Ireland working along the lines of reconciliation. And so when I think about those things, my mind has faces. I'm thinking about faces. I'm thinking about my friends in South Africa, Dennis Ackerman, and so many others doing work. Geraldina Céspedes, Guatemala, Silka Spajic, Bosnia, Sabiha Hussein. I'm thinking about my friend Laila Ayari in Tunisia, and Tunisia, the Muslim countries. Well, I have a group of young professionals and activists, all of them Muslims. They call me Nana. They adopted me as their Nana. And they take me to their mosques where they do work of women, empowering the women to have a voice in the newly democratic state after the Arab Spring in Tunisia. So I visit them. And so I have faces in my mind and everywhere. So thinking about the future, feminist theologians need to devise better ways to be in connection, in interdependence, in relation with the feminist and the women's movements going on around the world. Those who say that feminism is passé, they are probably living in Mars or somewhere else. They are not really in the real world. Those who say that feminism is over, feminism is something that belongs to older generations, I believe that they are speaking out of ignorance and out of lack of commitment to what is happening around the world. I serve on the International Advisory Board of the World Forum Theology and Liberation. We meet every 2 years in the context of the World Social Forum. The World Social Forum is the largest organization of activists, intellectuals, scholars, policymakers, people concerned about conflict, peace, religion, human rights, and social justice to devise ways of being more effective. It is highly interreligious. So in my context, I never thought that I would do that. It is life that has brought me in contact with my Muslim friends and communities. So they have instilled in me the desire to learn more from them. I would love to learn more from Islam and the practice of my Muslim friends, just as much as I have the desire of learning about black religions. And so I think that the movement takes you there. It's just a matter of allowing yourself to be taken by the dynamics of historical processes. Allow your mind and your heart to be taken along the lines of the historical processes for change. Just become a part of that movement. It will open doors. It will open doors for you in terms of becoming a global citizen, global thinker, someone who believes in the power of hope, and someone who believes in solidarity, and someone who values friendship, solidarity. And so with the interreligious dialogue is crucial. Among feminist scholars working interreligiously, ecumenical approaches are very much necessary in giving attention to the experiences of those who live and work in context of conflict, violence, survivors of war, survivors of violence. So it is our local locations connected, local contexts connected to what is happening around the world, and placing theology at the heart of the world. I think that is one of our major challenges, feeling ourselves connected to those doing the work around there, and we becoming a part of them and learning from them.
That was.
Say, you tell me.
You could just say you just finished up an interview with with Ashley and Kate. We're
Give me
putting-
your names here. I need the names. Please write in writing. I read better in writing.
You could just say Ashley and Kate.
No, I need your
Okay, okay.
You're
names
so funny.
so that they really are shown.
Well, we
And you know what? So that everybody will know who are you doing the work. I would love to do that. And that is a matter of honoring your work and giving acknowledgement of your work. I think that we should do that.
So it's Ashley Thering and
Ashley
Catherine
Thering
Common.
and Catherine Common. Okay. Oh, okay. Interview on what topic should I mention?
We're basically just doing, and we're doing interviews with pioneering what we're called
Pioneer
feminist
theologians. Okay. How do you pronounce it? Thering?
Yep.
Oh, perfect. Okay. You tell me when.
Wait, just one sec.
All right, go now and introduce yourself. Say who you are and that you just finished up doing this interview.
Hi, Maria Pilar Aquino. We just finished an interview here outside of the beautiful convention center, San Diego. I am with Ashley Thering and Catherine Common doing the interview with pioneer feminist theologians and just remembering the past and thinking about the future as a title of no. Wait, delete that. You know why? I am giving credit to Elizabeth again. I need to give on my own.
It's true.
What happens is that yesterday I did this paper for her book on thinking about the past. No. I just need to keep it simple for ourselves here.
Yeah.
Okay. The other part, just erase it. Okay?
Yeah.
It doesn't go. Okay.
All right.
Okay. Hi, this is Maria Pilar Aquino. We are out here at the convention center in beautiful San Diego. I am with Ashley Thering and Catherine Common doing an interview with pioneer feminist theologians. I am very grateful to them, and I'm so very happy that they are collecting the experiences and the voices and the hopes of feminist theologians from the past, but also looking at the future. Greetings to everyone. Love to all.